All right, good morning, everybody. Today is the 10th of February, 2024, and the time now is 10 hours 55. This is Chad Milam, the director, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. I'm just continuing on the final set of voice notes for the Disaster Relief CERT discussion on the ultimate disaster, war. Now, I do recall on voice note number 34, I did stipulate that I'd be rounding off last weekend at least. However, I took the decision to give everybody the opportunity to actually listen to the previous 34 voice notes before continuing, and just to monitor and gauge the progress of their time. One of the reasons I'm doing this on voice note on WhatsApp is to allow people that opportunity to at least come back, pick up where they left off, and continue to do it, as and when they need to. I did stipulate that I was going to be rounding off on emergency radio communications. However, there is two subjects which I feel need to be addressed as well in final closing. And the first one is the need for people to unite and come together as dedicated and registered volunteers, for example, through Disaster Relief CERT, CERT being the acronym for Community Emergency Response Teams. So I will share the link, of course, to Disaster Relief CERT, one word, .org.za in the chat box. I'd encourage everybody that has listened across the entire country ultimately to register, so that at least we can get you up into a central point whereby we can share critical and crucial information with you on a more personal basis than just generally throwing it out to public groups such as this one, whether it is a public community group or street group, or even a specific group like a CPF, Neighborhood Watch, etc. Having mentioned CPF, one thing I'd like to point out is that ultimately at the end of the day, Disaster Relief CERT is not looking at duplicating any additional service at all. We are not a first responder organization. That means we do not run day-to-day accidents, motor vehicle accidents, medical emergencies, etc., etc. Our goal is to primarily concentrate on providing assistance to not only our family, but also to our local community as a whole, in order to provide assistance during times of either large-scale events or disasters. And as you will recall, the definition of a disaster is ultimately where it is a situation of such magnitude that the local authorities, along with the communities, are unable to cope with the incident of its own accord. And therefore, it's all hands on deck, and we need everybody that's up and ready and prepared. And hopefully you are not one of the spontaneous volunteers, but rather one of the general volunteers, for example, through our non-government organization. The other thing I would like to point out is, if you don't want to, I wanted to say that because of the fact that we are not a first responder organization, we don't seek to take on members, for example, per se, from CPFs, block watchers, neighborhood watchers, etc., etc. However, it is advisable that members of the block watchers and CPFs in particular are members of registered volunteers of Disaster Relief CERT, because they play a very crucial and critical role in terms of not only disaster risk reduction, but also disaster relief and assistance. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that that role differs somewhat to what they would normally do on a day-to-day basis, in terms of oversight to SAPs, in terms of assisting SAPs with activities, being the eyes and ears, as well as patrolling, etc., etc. So that is a subject of its own accord, and that is a training session of its own accord. So I'm going to move on to the next voice note now, and then we'll wrap up on the volunteering side with regards to Disaster Relief CERT, as we move to voice note number 36. All right, voice note number 36, 10 February 2024, time is 1100 hours. And of course, we are continuing the disaster relief cert discussion on the ultimate disaster being war. And I've just started to cover the subject of volunteering with disaster relief cert. A very quick recap. We are not a first responder organization. We are only here to assist during times of disaster. It is recommended that CPFs, neighborhood watchers, and all other entities, members of those groups, in actual fact, do get involved with disaster relief cert as a registered volunteer, because of the fact that there's a lot of things that you will be expected of you that are differ to your normal day-to-day activities, etc. However, there's another advantage of being on this type of volunteer structure. We aim to reach out to the family members of people who are already involved in structures and other volunteer structures such as CPFs or even canine search and rescue, etc. So you've got one member of the family, maybe it's the husband who's involved. The wife and the children might in actual fact be sitting at home and they've got nothing to do. Normally, after my 40 years of volunteer work, I have come to the conclusion that the spouse, and especially the elder children, they tend to feel left out of the activities of the father. Look, in many instances, the mother's involved with something, or in other circumstances, teenage children are involved in some kind of volunteer work. And then the parents are left out and you know, are available, so to speak. And this is a good opportunity for them to, in actual fact, step up to the plate, whether you are the husband, the wife, or the adult, or at least I should say, over 16-year-old a teenager. Anybody over the age of 16 is more than welcome to register. So I'd like to encourage everybody to register as a disaster relief cert volunteer. And of course, the link is being shared below, and you just need to go to https:// disaster relief cert, CERT, all one word, .org.za. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, ladies and gentlemen, even though you might not want to actually get involved, we need plenty of volunteers to start off with. But in addition to that, we need plenty of money to train our volunteers and to provide basic equipment. And on that basis, as a registered public benefit organization, all donations made to the PBO, subject to you requesting a Section 18A receipt from us, your donation, you can offset it against your annual tax liability. In other words, it will reduce your taxable income, thereby ensuring that you pay in a lower bracket. There are some limits to it. I think in the personal capacity, it's 10,000 Rand a year. And in a company capacity, it is up to 100,000 Rand a year. We, in actual fact, need 5,000 Rand in year one to train one volunteer and to provide them two-way radio communications. So as you can see, we are already over 80 volunteers registered throughout South Africa. That means that we need a lot of money in order to move forward. Share this with other people. I will also share the public benefit organizations infographic and ad that you can share with others. If you don't want to contribute of your time, then at least I appeal to you all to reach out and to help us by making donations. Our banking details and the official letter is on our website, so you can pick it up there. And please only make money into that banking account. There is no other banking account. So that being said, I'm going to move on now on the final part of this discussion. And I just want to briefly, probably also over 2 voice notes, cover the need for two-way radio communications and how it can in actual fact integrate with local communities, combining both disaster relief cert volunteers as well as local communities and potentially other services as well. So we will be moving on to voice note number 37 now. Right, voice note number 37, 10 February 2024, time is 11:05. And of course, this is Chad Milam, Echo 1, Disaster Relief CERT, Director, continuing with the final closing voice notes on the ultimate disaster called war. For this particular segment of the overall training and information dissemination session, I want to talk about two-way radio communications. Now, in today's times, everybody is so well aware of the fact that cell phone networks are always there. And everybody's got a cell phone, and everybody can phone everybody throughout the world just by dialing a couple of buttons. That's all fair and well. When the technology works, it works, and it works great. Everybody's aware of the fact that, yeah, you can quickly send a message on WhatsApp or on Telegram, or you can gather information on Facebook and things like that. Well, here's the cruncher. Just stop and think about this for a minute. It doesn't make a difference where in the country you are. I just want to refer to the city center or the central part of the city of Johannesburg, i.e., I call the Ring Road, November 1, November 3, November 12. The ring road that surrounds the greater portion of the city of Johannesburg. Can you imagine if an earthquake were to occur and destroy everything within that inner circle, to the point that not a single building is standing, the roadways are ripped up, there are crevices and cracks, and tectonic plate is moved and ground is moved, and what used to be a roadway, suddenly there is a gaping hole and all that. Just picture that. Or a tornado comes through and destroys everything. There are no cell phone towers. There will not be any fiber optic cable. How are you going to talk to each other? How are you going to communicate with each other? How are you going to find out if your family is fine, if your family is good, if your family is not good, etc., etc.? How are you going to coordinate an evacuation when there is no cell phone connectivity? It's going to be pandemonium. I've mentioned it before. You've got a husband working in Sandton and a wife working in Germiston, and the child is, say, not working, is at school somewhere on the western side of Johannesburg, like maybe Constantia Kloof. How are you going to coordinate all of this when you've got no more internet and you've got no cell phone? Not only that, in terms of our current load shedding that is constant, how many times you don't realize it as an individual, just how many times you are unable to make contact with other people. You pick up the phone and you phone somebody during load shedding your end, or on the other end, or somewhere in between, there is no power, and you dial your family member and it's engaged, and you think, oh, well, they're busy on the phone. Surprise, surprise, they're actually not busy on the phone. The cell phone network is not working, full stop. And this is why it is crucial that every single person that hears my voice today, or any day, whether it be morning, afternoon, evening, I don't care when it is, you've got to seriously consider the fact that cell phone connections are failing and will fail in times of disaster. Without getting into any political discussion, I just want to point out something that's happened in the Gaza Strip during this war of Gaza. On several occasions, all communications in the Gaza Strip have been either cut off or turned off. That can happen in South Africa quite easily for several days. How are you going to call for help from your family? How are you going to check up on your family? But even more importantly, how are you going to call for help and assistance from fire, from ambulance? Yes, you're going to have a panic button. You can hit the panic button and, it'll make contact with your private security service providers. As long as your batteries are still working, that system will work. But outside of that, but it's easy. I'll just charge my cell phone up. With what? No electricity. Yes, there's a question about how do you charge up your two-way radio. I'll cover that in the next voice note. Okay, moving on with voice note number 38. My apologies. I actually accidentally cut that last voice note off too short. We can continue in the discussion with regards to two-way radio communication. And on the last voice note, I ended up by saying, well, how do you charge your cell phone? And then there's the question, how do you charge up your two-way radio? There's a very big difference between the two. Your cell phone, for example, needs a little 220-volt charger. That's normally about 3 volts or 5 volts. Most of them are 5 volt for the higher current output and quicker charging rate and time. But unfortunately, when you start looking at battery backup systems in particular, and generally when you start looking at solar systems and everything else, they are in actual fact either working on a 12, 24, or 48 volt circuit, whereby all of this power is brought in off of the solar panel through a specific method of connection into a battery bank. Now, one of the things a lot of people don't realize is even if your solar system is working off 48 volts, there is a way to tap into 12 volts or 24 volts, but there is no way to tap into 3 or 5 volts without having any additional specific type of step-down electronics, etc., etc. So it's a lot easier to actually charge a two-way radio on 12 volts. Vast majority of the two-way radio equipment have got a built-in or have got a car charger capability that can be put into your standard cigarette lighter plug in the car. And as long as your motor's turning over and you got power on your car battery, then, my apologies, then of course, you can in actual fact charge up your two-way radio. Utilizing other battery backup systems and that you can keep radios going for many hours. For example, the entrance level BD405 might be able to last 24 hours. I say might because it depends on the battery condition, etc., etc. And therefore, as a result of that, you can at least have a long period of time whereby you got two-way radio communication capabilities. That being said, you can also turn off your radio for certain periods and only come up, for example, like we do as radio amateurs during times of disaster worldwide. What the radio amateurs do, they'll have a scheduled time. Every hour on the hour, you turn your radio on for 10 minutes. When the control stations call you in, you give your report back and you leave it at that. You turn your radio off, and of course, you can conserve your power on your batteries, which can last weeks, if not days, if not weeks. So there's a lot of capability of keeping everything going on a two-way radio. I want to do one final voice note on two-way radio, and just describe within the full 5-minute period the different type of radio capabilities, and make a suggestion of which one would in actual fact be the better one to choose ultimately. However, in closing on voice note number 38, I need you to seriously consider the difference between two-way radio and cell phone. And it's time to shift that mindset out of cell phone networks and internet capabilities as being there all the time. Because in times of a disaster, as I say, an earthquake, a tornado, a massive event, even unrest can rip up internet cables, fiber cables, cell phone towers are vandalized, destroyed, broken down, etc. So there's a fair bit to consider when it comes to two-way radio communication. Okay, let's end off on voice note number 38 and 34, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 37 and move on to voice note number 38, I think it is. 34, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, we're going to move on to 39. Just trying to get my numbers in order here. 10 February 2024, 11:25, voice note number 39, if I got my numbers right. We are still discussing two-way radio communications, and I just remembered I also want to raise a point regarding mortuaries and animals. So we'll do that straight after this. So now, coming back to two-way radio communications, we got two capabilities. One is via repeater networks. These are where one radio will talk to a repeater high site, normally on top of one of the high mountains in your area. which will in turn speak to other radios on the same network. And of course, the reverse happens as well when you do a reply. The advantages of repeater networks gives a much wider area coverage. For example, from the Roodepoort area on the western side of Johannesburg, I can talk to people in Benoni using a repeater high site at Northcliffe. So that gives an advantage there. However, one of the disadvantages in terms of a repeater high site is if that high site is affected by adverse weather conditions or vandalized, stripped down, destroyed, disabled, etc., especially in times of unrest, then you're not going to be able to communicate with each other on that basis, which moves us into what's called a simplex communication capability. Now, the simplex communication is literally from one radio to another radio, or one radio to multiple radios in a much shorter distance or coverage area. So let's give you an example. In a complex setting, for example, multiple handhelds within the complex will be able to communicate with each other. And you will find that certain people in certain units in a complex will be able to communicate with the complex next door, or even maybe 3 streets or 5 streets down the road. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail on this because this is a training session of its own accord. What I will do is I will, in actual fact, post a PDF document introducing the community emergency radio network concept. You guys can read it and get an idea on how it works. Now, what happens here is that the communities need to buy in on this, and you need to have as many radios as possible throughout your entire area and your entire community. So somebody in Street 1 will be able to speak to somebody in Street 5, who, of course, is going to be able to talk to the majority of the people in Street 5, but they could, in actual fact, also speak to somebody in Street 10. And so you have this networking of the radio communications on a simplex basis, and you don't rely on repeaters. So the advantages of this is, firstly, it does become a fair bit cheaper because you normally don't need to put in the higher powered equipment in order to reach your repeater. So, for example, you know, from the Krugersdorp Bridge to Northcliffe, you might battle with a handheld radio at 5 watts, and therefore you would need to have a mobile radio of 25 watts, which is now 5 times the amount, not only in power, but also almost triple the amount in price. In addition to that, you can still extend your distance a bit using external antennas, even covert-looking external antennas that can be attached to the handheld radios that can be charged by 12 volt and solar. And of course, you now build up a community-based radio network where you can call for assistance from each other. Then, of course, at the end of the day, what that means is that you can integrate that radio network with other services in the area. So, for example, somebody in Volkejewel might call somebody at the top of the ridge on Constantia Kloof, who could, for example, send me a message via radio. And if it means I walk across the road to a local ambulance station, I can ask them. And of course, I got the fire station a block away. I can also walk down there and ask them to send fire or ambulance. So that's the basic concept of the two-way radio network that I believe everybody needs to look at and buy in on. Please study the document, share it with as many people as possible, and let's start growing the community emergency radio networks. Okay, I'm going to move on to voice note number 39 now, our final voice note on animals and morgues, and then we're going to call this discussion as over and complete. Thanks all. This is Chad, Echo 1 out. 10 February 2024, 11:48. Final voice note, I believe, number 40. Very briefly, when it comes to the ultimate disaster war, there are 2 factors that need to also be taken into account that I think I need to just concentrate and provide a little bit more information on. I know I mentioned mortuaries, morgues, temporary morgues. As a community, we must never lose sight of the need to set up temporary mortuaries and to deal with the dead. There's a multifold reason for it. Firstly, we cannot leave deceased people. That's not very respectful, firstly, to the deceased or their family within the confines of a disaster. If they are left there for too long, there is a major possibility of additional diseases being introduced into the overall disaster area, which of course is going to have a negative impact on rescuers, first responders, and even survivors in the area. Secondly, there are many religious connotations to the recovery, the storage, and the burial of the dead that must never, ever, ever, ever be disregarded or disrespected. That is one of the quickest ways of shutting down, even from the spontaneous volunteers' perspective, of shutting down your voluntary network that is able to assist if you are going to disrespect the deceased. The highest regard must be given to them. So it's not only from respectful to the family members and considering the health connotation that could occur, but most definitely to ensuring that the relief workers themselves and religious beliefs are adhered to and respected across the board. So I think those are things that, again, we need specialized people, specialized volunteers who are capable of dealing with this. And yes, it's taxing on one's emotions. But I've got to appeal to community members. If you feel, regardless of what your religious belief is, if you feel you can assist in times of recovering and preparing the deceased, then please register as a disaster relief cert volunteer. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak to you about the very same thing when it comes to animals. Now, majority of our communities will be affected within the suburban areas, and therefore it is the domesticated animal that also needs to be recovered. Just stop and think now. You got a dead body on one side of a street, and you got dogs that haven't been fed for 2 or 3 days. They're going to start eating on the body. That's not good. Is this morbid? No, this is fact. Get used to it. This is where I come out of the discussion and I come into the factual side. So one has to consider that we also need volunteers that are able to, in actual fact, rescue our domesticated animals, not just to prevent damage to the dead, but for the sake of those animals. We need to get them to safe shelter. We need to feed them. Otherwise, this is what's going to happen. One, they're going to die. That could be your child's loved one that is now just going to die because everybody else has ignored it. But even still, there's the health connotation and risk to health due to the introduction of additional diseases being injected into our disaster scenario. And a lot of times that during these disasters, Sod's law will have it, the heavens will open up, the rain will fall, and of course now you're introducing decaying matter into underground water, and that itself becomes a problem as well, or into streams and everything. So the need for animal rescue people and volunteers is also something that needs to be considered. All right, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for the time that you have given me. I trust that this has not only been informative, but it has been educational. And once you are registered as a disaster relief cert volunteer, I'm almost certain we can take that educational side, the introduction of knowledge, and we can turn it, of information, we can turn it into a knowledge base whereby that knowledge can be applied as a skill. So please look out for the links below and look out for the relevant PDF documents and make contact with me, and let's see about getting you up and registered. And therefore, on behalf of the directors, John Groom, Stephen Reynolds, and myself, I'd like to say thank you for your time, your participation, and I wish you all the best moving forward, and look forward to seeing your registration. This is Chad Milam, Echo One, out.